I still remember the first breath I took when I stepped out of my truck that morning. The crisp mountain air filled my lungs like a memory I didn't know I'd missed. The pine trees swayed gently in the cold breeze, whispering secrets through their needles, and the silence of the valley wrapped around me like a warm blanket. After 15 long years, I was finally home. The gravel crunched under my boots as I walked toward the old cabin. My father had built it with his bare hands back in the 70s, cutting every log, setting every stone. It wasn't fancy, just sturdy, quiet, and peaceful. He used to call it our little piece of heaven. I had left after he passed, heading to the city for work, trying to outrun the memories. But as time went on, the noise of city life ate at me: horns, crowds, deadlines. I started dreaming about this valley again. The smell of the pines. The sound of the creek that ran behind the porch. The way the stars looked like they'd been scattered by hand across a black velvet sky. So I packed up what was left of my life, drove all night, and came back. I thought I was returning to peace. But the moment I parked, I realized peace wasn't on the menu. I'd barely cut the engine when a voice cut through the quiet. "Excuse me." I turned. There she was. A woman in a pastel pink sweater, clutching a clipboard like it was a weapon, marching toward me like she owned the mountain. She had that look, tight-lipped, overconfident, and ready to fight about something no one else cared about. "Can I help you?" I asked, already bracing myself. "You can't park there," she snapped. "This area is HOA property." "HOA." My brow furrowed. "HOA. There wasn't one when I left." She tilted her head with a smug smile. "Well, there is now. Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. And if you plan on staying here, you'll need to pay the fees, follow our rules, and get approval for any unsightly structures." I looked around at the valley, at my cabin, the same one my father built, sitting proudly in the sunlight. I couldn't help but laugh. "Lady," I said, shaking my head, "this isn't your valley. It's mine." Her smile dropped. "Excuse me," I said. I repeated slowly. "This cabin, this land, it's all mine. Been in my family for over 70 years. She crossed her arms, clipboard pressed to her chest like armor. "We'll see about that." I didn't know it then, but that one sentence, 5 little words, was the spark that lit a wildfire. Her name, I'd soon learn, was Karen Holt, self-proclaimed president of the Whispering Pines HOA. And she had no idea what she'd just started. Because I wasn't just another homeowner. I was the man who owned the entire valley. I woke up the next morning to a sound I hadn't heard in years: birds singing outside my window. For a second, I almost forgot about the woman with the clipboard and her ridiculous rules. I made myself some coffee, sat on the old porch steps, and looked out over the valley. The mist was rising off the trees, the sunlight cutting through like golden ribbons. For the first time in a long time, I felt grounded. But peace, it seemed, wasn't part of my welcome package. When I walked to my truck, I saw something fluttering on the windshield. A notice. Printed in all caps. Violation. Unauthorized parking, area under HOA regulation. Remove your vehicle within 24 hours or face towing. I laughed out loud. You've got to be kidding me. By the time I finished breakfast, another paper had been taped to my door. Notice number 2, unauthorized structure, subject to removal. I looked at it in disbelief. The unauthorized structure was my cabin. The one my father built long before her HOA ever existed. That's when I realized this wasn't just about parking. This was about control. Karen Holt wasn't trying to enforce rules. She was trying to claim power. I wasn't going to let her rewrite history. Not mine. Not my father's. So I got in my truck and drove 30 minutes to the county recorder's office. The same old building where my dad used to pay property taxes decades ago. Inside, I requested every document with our family name. The clerk handed me a dusty file folder with yellowed papers. There it was, the original Carter family deed, dated 1952. Signed, sealed, and recorded. As I flipped through the pages, I realized something shocking. The Whispering Pines development had been built around our land, not on it. The HOA's boundary lines literally stopped right at the edge of the valley. In other words, My cabin wasn't part of their HOA. It wasn't even in their jurisdiction. When I got back, Karen was waiting near my driveway, standing beside two other HOA members like some kind of self-appointed counsel. She waved her clipboard like a sword. "You again. We've told you, this property falls under Whispering Pines regulations." I stepped closer, calm but firm. "Actually, it doesn't." I held out the file. "This here is the original deed. This valley, including this cabin and everything you see from here to the ridge, belongs to the Carter Family Trust." "My trust?" Karen blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "That can't be right," she snapped. "Our community map." I cut her off. "Your community map ends half a mile up the hill. You built around my land. Not on it." She stood there, silent for a moment, her face turning red. Then, with a forced smile, she said, "We'll see about that." As she turned to walk away, I caught her whisper to the man beside her. "Call the board. He's not staying." That's when I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The war for the valley had just begun. If there's one thing I learned about people like Karen Holt, it's that they don't back down easily. When their authority is questioned, they double down. Harder, louder, and dumber. The morning after our confrontation, I found fresh tire tracks carved across my driveway. Someone had dumped a load of gravel right at the entrance, blocking my truck in. A bright orange cone sat on top like a trophy. Taped to it was another notice. Whispering Pines HOA. Road maintenance underway. Do not remove. I took a deep breath. My father's voice echoed in my head. "Son, you don't fight fire with fire. You fight it with paperwork." So I called the sheriff's office. The deputy who arrived, a friendly local named Tom, took one look at the notice and chuckled. "Sir," he said, "this is private land. HOA's got no say here." He radioed a tow company, and within the hour, the gravel pile was gone. But that only made Karen angrier. Over the next week, she unleashed her little army. One day, I caught two of her board members sneaking around behind my cabin, snapping photos of my property. When I confronted them, they claimed they were documenting violations. Violations of what? Breathing too loud? Then came the sheriff again, this time responding to a complaint that I was illegally occupying HOA property. The deputy recognized me and shook his head. "Sorry, man. We have to check. Karen's been calling every day." It became a routine. I'd wake up, fix something around the cabin, and brace for whatever nonsense she'd cook up next. But I didn't fight back. Not yet. Instead, I rebuilt. I spent my days repairing the porch, restoring the stone fireplace, and repainting the cabin's trim the same forest green my dad loved. The smell of fresh cedar mixed with mountain air reminded me why I came back. Every nail I drove into that wood felt like reclaiming another piece of my past. One evening, as I was stacking firewood, I noticed headlights creeping up the dirt road. Too slow to be casual. Too deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped outside quietly. There she was. Karen Holt herself, in her little silver SUV, parked halfway up the road. She stepped out holding a can of red spray paint and started walking toward my fence. I turned on the flashlight. "You sure you want to do that, Karen?" She froze like a deer caught in headlights. Her voice trembled, but her pride didn't let her back down. "You think you can come back here and act like you own everything? Not on my watch." I smiled calmly. "Karen, I don't think I own it." "I do own it." Her face went pale. She dropped the spray paint, muttered something under her breath, and stormed back to her SUV. As her headlights disappeared into the night, I couldn't help but grin. She wasn't finished, but neither was I. The next move would be mine. A few days passed after the spray paint incident, and for a while, things went quiet. Too quiet. When someone like Karen Holt goes silent, it's never peace, it's plotting. Sure enough, that calm broke one morning when I received an official-looking envelope in my mailbox. Inside was a letter titled, "Cease and Desist Order, Property Violation." The HOA was demanding that I vacate the premises immediately for illegal occupation of Whispering Pines land. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my coffee. But when I looked closer, I realized they'd taken it a step further. They had actually filed a complaint in county court. They were trying to sue me for living on my own land. That's when I decided enough was enough. I called my lawyer, an old family friend named Rick Dalton. He'd known my father, handled our family's estate, and he was as sharp as they came. When I told him what was happening, he chuckled. "Son," he said, "this is gonna be fun. Pack those deeds and meet me in court." The hearing took place a week later in the small courthouse downtown. Karen arrived in a tailored blazer, carrying a binder thicker than a Bible, her face glowing with smug confidence. Behind her sat half the HOA board, whispering like it was some big victory parade. Rick leaned over and whispered, "Let her talk first." When the judge entered, the clerk called our case, Whispering Pines HOA versus Carter Family Trust. Karen stood up proudly. "Your Honor," she began, "the defendant has been unlawfully occupying property within our community. He refuses to comply with HOA regulations, pay dues, or remove unapproved structures." The judge nodded, motioning for her to continue. She flipped through her papers dramatically, pointing at colorful maps and photos. When it was finally our turn, Rick rose calmly. "Your Honor," he said, holding up an old manila folder, "my client isn't a trespasser. He's the rightful owner of the valley in question. The land in dispute isn't within Whispering Pines' jurisdiction." He handed the judge the original deed, signed in 1952 by my grandfather, notarized, and stamped by the county. Then he unfolded a current zoning map, overlaying it with Karen's HOA map. The room went silent. Rick pointed with his pen. "As you can see, Your Honor, the HOA boundary stops here, about half a mile before Mr. Carter's cabin. Whispering Pines has no legal claim to this land whatsoever." Karen's smug smile vanished. "That can't be true," she stammered. "Our community brochure says." The judge cut her off sharply. "Ms. Holt, brochures don't define property law. Deeds do." Then he turned to me. "Mr. Carter, this land has belonged to your family for decades?" "Yes, Your Honor," I said proudly. 73 years. The judge nodded. "Case dismissed. And Ms. Holt, I suggest you and your HOA refrain from harassing this man further, or face legal consequences." Karen's face turned white. She looked like someone had pulled the ground right out from under her. As we walked out of that courtroom, Rick clapped me on the shoulder. "Your dad would have loved that," he said with a grin. And for the first time since I came back, I truly felt the valley was mine again. A week after the court hearing, I drove back up to the valley, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace. No letters taped to my door. No fake violation notices. No more HOA patrols peeking through the trees. The road was quiet again. The only sounds were the birds and the soft hum of the wind through the pines. As I pulled up to the cabin, I noticed something lying near my driveway, a folded HOA sign that once read, "Private Community, Residents Only." Someone had tossed it there, probably out of embarrassment. I leaned down, picked it up, and couldn't help but chuckle. That sign had once been a symbol of Karen's power. Now, it was just a piece of junk. I spent the next few days fixing up the last corners of the cabin. I rebuilt the porch railing, stained the wood, and polished the old brass door handle that my father had installed decades ago. Every creak of the floorboards and every hammer strike felt like reconnecting with his spirit. This cabin wasn't just a structure. It was a story, our story. When everything was done, I made one final addition, a new wooden sign at the entrance to the valley. I carved it myself, just the way Dad taught me when I was a kid. The sign read, "Welcome to Carter Valley, private land. Respect the legacy." I placed it where everyone could see it, right where the old HOA property line began. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee. The sky burned orange and gold, fading into deep blue. The creek nearby whispered softly, and for the first time, I felt like everything was right where it was supposed to be. I thought about my dad, how proud he would have been to see his land still standing, still ours. He used to say, "Land is more than dirt, son. It's memory. It's family. It's who we are." He was right. A few days later, I heard through the locals that the Whispering Pines HOA had voted Karen out as president. Apparently, after losing the court case, The community blamed her for wasting their funds and embarrassing everyone. Can't say I was surprised. Some people build fences. Others build legacies. Karen built her fence a little too far, and it cost her everything. Now, when visitors stop by and ask about the sign, I just smile and tell them the short version. I left. Someone tried to take it. But in the end, I took it all back. Then I lean back in my chair, sip my coffee, and watch the morning fog roll through the trees. Because this valley, my valley, doesn't just belong to me. It belongs to the memory of everyone who came before. And as long as I'm alive, no HOA, no rulebook, and no Karen will ever take that away again.